The story begins with clips of multiple girls who have been brutally stabbed in their chest, with blood oozing out from their bodies. The gory scene cuts, and we are introduced to a man named Keller, who is going through some psychological issues. He is standing before a house, waiting for the door to open. A strange man opens the door. He receives a bag and an envelope from Keller with a smile. Later on, Detective Valentine and Detective Stokes are being interviewed by some journalists about a series of murder cases that they are working on. Detective Valentine shares his opinion about the murders being connected to each other. However, the constant bombardment of questions by the journalists makes him lose his cool, and he growls at them with fury. Detective Stokes quickly controls the situation, and they both leave. Later, both the detectives are confronted by their boss for being irresponsible. Detective Valentine has alcohol problems due to his failed marital life, and the guilt of not being able to give his daughter the time she deserves. Detective Stokes is a young woman who has just entered the field and lives alone. Keller enters a bar to enjoy his evening and meets a woman who tries to seduce him. However, he does not pay any attention to her and leaves. Later, they meet again just outside of the bar. Keller is holding a dagger. Suddenly, the woman attacks him, sinking her teeth in his neck. It turns out she is a bloodthirsty vampire hunting for prey. The next day, when Keller wakes up, he feels very strange. His head is dizzy, and he clearly remembers the previous night's encounter. Keller wonders if the incident was real or just a dream. He observes himself in the mirror and finds strange marks on his neck. It's the same spot where that woman had pierced her fangs, leaving 2 circular marks. Keller goes to his office, but in the middle of the meeting, he starts feeling uneasy. He keeps having flashes of the previous night in his office, and the marks on his neck begin to itch. He has covered those under a bandage to avoid unnecessary attention. Suddenly, one of the colleagues begins seducing him during the meeting, and he violently stabs her with a pen. The rest of his coworkers start laughing, making light of his odd reaction, and he joins them. Apparently, he is hallucinating. In reality, everyone at the meeting is staring at him, baffled as he laughs for no evident reason. Keller excuses himself and immediately leaves the conference room. At the other end, a woman is performing on stage and gets praised by the director of the play. Later, she is getting dressed in the changing room when she hears a loud thud from outside. She quickly gets her stuff and leaves the room. She waits for an elevator, chatting with her mother on the phone. As the elevator arrives, she steps in, followed by a strange man who joins her. Afraid for her safety, the woman immediately leaves the elevator, opting for the stairs instead. Her adrenaline kicks in as she reaches the parking lot. She constantly feels like she's being followed. Looking behind her shoulder, she finds no one. She finally reaches her car and is fumbling with the lock when suddenly a drop of blood lands on her hand. Horrifyingly, the woman realizes that she is being fed on. Keller, who seems to have transitioned into a bloodthirsty vampire himself, is drinking blood from her body. The girl tries to set herself free, but Keller holds her still and does not let her get away. Finally, Keller backs himself away from the woman, and she gasps for her life. Watching her, Keller returns to his senses. He realizes what he has just done, and the shock makes him drop down on the ground unconscious. The next day, Detective Valentine and Stokes visit a crime scene in the parking lot. They are standing in the same place and observing the lifeless body. It is truly a despicable sight. They realize that the body is similar to the ones that they had previously discovered, and believe that the culprit must be the same person. Both detectives then visit the director of the play to investigate the case and dig for information about the deceased girl. Detective Valentine stops by at his ex's place as he wants to meet his daughter. Unfortunately, she is not home. The detective gets angry, and his ex-wife asks him to leave. Meanwhile, Detective Stokes is waiting for him in the car. Stokes gets out to grab food, leaving Valentine alone in the car. His mind creates different flashbacks of the victims in the cases he is investigating. They are highly disturbing, and he begins to tremble as if he is having a seizure. However, as soon as Stokes returns, Valentine stops trembling. The next scene introduces us to Slight, who is also a vampire and a persistent companion of the vampire lady Lilith. The two have Keller restrained to a table. Lilith and Slight leave the room and initiate a heated discussion about their kind dominating the world. Later, Lilith finds herself at a gothic nightclub, eyeing a very stunning girl. The girl asks Lilith if she wants a drink. Lilith is watching her with lustful eyes. She feels thirsty for her blood. She keeps her composure before the unsuspecting girl, not wanting to scare her off. No matter how hard Lilith tries, the lust takes over. She eventually attacks the girl and drinks her blood, sucking the life out of her. Lilith stands before a mirror, crying as she looks at the girl on the floor. Once her thirst is satisfied, She returns to her senses and realizes the crime she has committed. Lilith returns to Slight, who informs her about Keller. He tells Lilith that Keller is ready now. They both look at the person entering the room with admiration. They have successfully transformed Keller into a vampire. At the other end, Detective Stokes and Valentine are discussing the evidence with the medical examiner. Valentine has some strange theories about the assassin being a sadist. He believes that as the only explanation for the horrible atrocities inflicted on the poor victims. However, the medical examiner disagrees with Valentine, which makes him crazy. Back at their hideout, Lilith is helping Keller adjust to his new instincts. Lilith tells him that the vampires are an endangered species, and they need Keller's help to survive and rebuild their community. Meanwhile, Detective Stokes and Valentine are sitting in their office, discussing the case. The progress on the case is frustrating Valentine, and he is about to crack under the pressure. Suddenly, Stokes receives a call, informing her about another crime that has taken place in the Gothic nightclub. The victim has a similar wound, and the situation is the same as the rest of the cases. The two detectives reach the location and start questioning the club owner. They pressure him to answer, and he finally blurts out that the deceased girl was a regular customer. The owner has no further clue about the situation. This makes Detective Valentine furious, and he starts beating up the poor man. Detective Stokes pulls him away and asks him to leave. After Valentine's departure, she calmly inquires the owner if he knows anything that can help them in the case. After concentrating for a while, the owner remembers that the victim had been dancing with another gorgeous woman. Stokes asks the club owner to describe her. They finally have a lead. Meanwhile, Keller and Lilith are having a heated argument with each other. She tells Keller that it is against the rules to roam around and feed on humans whenever he wants. He mocks her for stating the rules, as she had been the one who attacked Keller. She replies to this accusation, saying that he is the chosen one and his blood type is similar to theirs. Later on, Lilith informs Slight that it is done. The one thing that they had been trying to achieve all along has finally happened. We learn shockingly that Lilith is pregnant. In the next scene, Detective Valentine is resting on the couch, drinking his worries away. He falls asleep, but suddenly his daughter's voice wakes him up. She asks him why he is holding the pictures of the deceased girls, and oddly questions if he is the one who claimed the lives of these women. But before Detective Valentine can answer, a dark hooded figure grabs his daughter from behind and tries to slaughter her with a sharp knife. Valentine begins quivering with another seizure, just like the earlier one he had in the car. In the same instance, his phone rings and he wakes up. Apparently, whole thing was just a dream. He picks up the phone and feels glad to hear the medical examiner's voice. He tells the detective that of the two blood types he had been provided with, one belongs to the assassin. However, he has discovered something peculiar about his blood type. The blood report highlights a very distinctive type of anemia that is exceedingly rare. He further explains that studying this type of anemia is somewhat tricky, so a colleague has recommended a special hematologist in Mexico who can explain the bizarre iron cravings and eating habits of the assassin. The medical examiner reminds the detective about a case in the 1970s involving the Keller family. Detective Valentine instantly remembers. It was a mass homicidal case. Detective Valentine questions the doctor about the similarity between the two cases. The doctor replies that the only kind of anemia that was ever registered was from that case. The detective asks whether it was the mother or the father who had the similarity, to which the doctor replies that it was the son. Suddenly, we see another flashback of the same child. The boy is sitting beside his deceased mother, holding a phone to his ears. Blood is smeared all over his hands and face, and he is calling 911. No one ever suspected that an innocent-looking boy concealed a horrendous secret. On the other hand, Slight enters the room where Keller is tied, but to his horror, the room is empty. He silently prays for his life when suddenly Keller emerges from behind and stabs him with an iron rod. After butchering Slight, Keller exits the room to search for Lilith. He calls out her name. She realizes something horrifying awaits and runs away from him. Lilith eventually finds out about Slight's demise and tries hiding from the maniac. Keller acts like a lunatic as he tries to look for Lilith. She keeps running away from him, trying to save her life. Eventually, she surrenders and comes out of hiding. She pleads with him to leave and not hurt her unborn child. In return, she is ready to do anything he wants. Meanwhile, the police enter a room, and what they find shocks them to their core. They call Detective Stokes and Valentine to witness the horrifying scene. When the two enter, their mouths drop open in disbelief. It is a red room, with different knives hanging on the wall. The walls are covered with pictures of multiple victims. The team realizes that everything had been connected all along, and Detective Valentine was right. While this unfolds, Somewhere on a dark street, Keller is following a drunk girl. The girl turns around and discovers him standing there. She builds up the courage to walk to him and asks if he is a cop. He does not answer her and keeps smiling eerily, which makes the girl paranoid. She threatens to call the cops on him, but before she can do anything, he stabs her, climbs on top of her, and starts drinking her blood. While all of this is happening, Danielle, a friend of the deceased girl, is hiding behind the wall, trying to keep herself composed as she watches the horrific scene. She holds herself together and tries not to make a sound. The gruesome scene makes her want to throw up, but she does not want to attract the cold-blooded monster. After draining every last drop of blood from the woman, a satisfied Keller walks in the street. When one of his old companions arrives, his friend, Jacob, asks Keller to hop in with another friend. They drive to a discreet place and tell Keller that they are aware of the gruesome activities he has been involved in. Jacob wants to know more about it, and his other friends beat Keller with a baseball bat. They beat him to the point they believe he must have passed out. They begin laughing, but suddenly realize that his body is not on the floor. In a split second, Jacob watches his friend assassinated, his throat sliced open. In the same moment, Jacob turns around and finds Keller standing there. He asks for forgiveness, with fear evident in his eyes. Keller comforts him that he is not going to hurt Jacob, but suddenly grabs him by his neck and rips his throat out of his body. Danielle decides to file a report for what she has witnessed and visits the detectives. She tells them that her friend was with a guy who had ended her life. They asked about the guy's appearance and the details of what happened. She starts crying and tells them everything she remembers. She informs them that a sick monster was eating her friend, and her neck was all chewed up. The detectives want to get a sketch of the suspect. Detective Valentine talks to Dr. Corazon on the phone, inquiring about the discovery the medical examiner has revealed. Corazon tells him that he's dealing with a highly sinister creature. The detective does not understand and asks him to clarify. The doctor tells him that in the 1970s, there occurred a series of assassinations, and all the victims had the same patterns in their blood. He tells the detective that the culprit's unique blood condition leaches out iron from the victim's body, reducing their oxygen and suffocating them. He further explains that in 1919, some people in a town had captured a few girls who had strange fangs in their mouth. The girls claimed that the people who'd captured them were monsters. They begged for their lives and even claimed that they were just like them, and they worshipped the same god, but the men did not listen. Finally, they slaughtered the girls with long wooden nails. The doctor further talks about the two vampires, which turn out to be Slight and Lilith. Slight once cracked open a door and found Lilith tied to a bed. He shared her beliefs about building their community and saved her because he thought that she was the queen. They both escaped from that place and went into hiding. The detective walks into a bar and starts drinking. The information is nothing like what he had expected. He keeps drinking, one shot after another. He doesn't realize that Keller is standing right behind him. After a few seconds, the detective catches sight of Keller and asks if he needs any help. Keller asks him about the case. The detective feels irritated and tells him to leave. After Keller exits, one of the bartenders hands a note to the detective that says, "Now you know that I have slaughtered my parents." The detective immediately stands up and runs outside. Keller hits him and pushes him down. When the detective gets back on his feet, Keller is nowhere to be seen. Following this, Stokes and Valentine narrate the whole findings about the vampire story to their boss, but she mocks them, which makes Valentine angry. The boss takes them off the case, but Valentine refuses to walk away from it. Stokes is worried that she might lose her job. Still, Valentine comforts her, saying that this will never happen. He asks her to calm down. Detective Stokes takes her jacket and leaves the area. Valentine gets back to drinking, when suddenly, Lilith attacks him and threatens him to stop following Keller. She gives him an ultimatum. If he listens, she will stop all the assassinations. He cannot figure out if this is his hallucination or something else. Meanwhile, Stokes is in her house when Keller attacks her and tragically ends her life. Detective Valentine calls her to inquire about her health, but is unable to reach her. When he breaks into her house, he finds her sitting silently, holding her neck. Her arms, along with the towel around her neck, are covered in blood. A frenzied Valentine assures her that she is going to be okay. But before he can call the ambulance, he realizes that Stokes is no more. At that moment, Keller calls Detective Valentine and mocks him. He threatens to harm the detective's daughter, causing Valentine to barge into his ex-wife's house. He finds his wife's boyfriend and holds a gun against him, demanding to know his daughter's whereabouts. He investigates the entire house, and finally resorts to telling his ex-wife about the woman, Stokes' demise, and vampires. Valentine wants to put an end to this nightmare and agrees to meet Keller at a very eerie location. He keeps looking for Keller and Lilith. Suddenly, Keller attacks the detective and slits his throat. After that, he holds Lilith, but before he can sink his fangs in her, she stabs a knife in his back. She tells the fatally wounded detective that she can help him live forever and thanks him for saving her. Later, Lilith is shown leaving the country with her young son. 5 months after the demise of Stokes, Detective Valentine is seen in a peculiar situation. He is sitting with Keller and suddenly starts beating him up. It is an inconclusive end, but perhaps Keller ends up getting what he deserved.